Long before humans mapped the Arctic Ocean, something was already moving beneath the ice. A shark alive today may have been swimming these waters when Shakespeare was still writing his plays. It grows barely a centimeter each year, does not reproduce until it is more than a century old, and hunts in darkness despite being functionally blind. The Arctic Ocean is the smallest and coldest ocean on Earth. It spends months each year in total darkness. It should not be able to produce predators of this caliber, and yet it does. The Greenland shark has been found with polar bear remains in its stomach. Killer whales are pushing farther north each decade, entering hunting grounds they rarely visited in the past. The narwhal carries a 3-meter tooth packed with millions of nerve endings, and the reason it evolved remains one of the strangest stories in marine biology. Even the seals at the foundation of the Arctic food web survive by sleeping in a way almost no other mammal on Earth does. Today, we'll explore how the coldest ocean on Earth became one of evolution's most ruthless proving grounds. If you enjoy this kind of content, a like and subscribe helps more people find it. And I'm curious, what brought you here tonight? Can't sleep? Or just love this kind of thing? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's descend beneath the Arctic ice and meet the hunters that have spent millions of years mastering one of the harshest environments on Earth. Some oceans announce their abundance immediately. Coral reefs bloom with color. Warm currents carry life in every direction. Food moves through countless pathways, branching and reconnecting until the system becomes almost impossible to trace. The Arctic Ocean does the opposite. It reveals very little at first glance. Spread across roughly 14 million square kilometers, it is the smallest of the world's 5 oceans, and with an average depth of just over 1,000 meters, the shallowest as well. For much of the year, a ceiling of sea ice rests over large portions of its surface, turning the ocean into something that seems less like open water and more like a landscape caught between states. At the surface, the water hovers near negative 1.8 degrees Celsius, the freezing point of salt water. It exists perpetually on the edge of solidity. A slight change would turn vast regions into ice. Yet beneath that frozen skin, currents continue to move, animals continue to hunt, and entire ecosystems continue their quiet work. The ocean appears dormant from above, while remaining intensely alive below, a contradiction that defines nearly everything about this place. Winter deepens the paradox. Across large stretches of the Arctic, the sun disappears below the horizon for months at a time. Darkness arrives not as a nightly event, but as a season. Days pass without sunrise, weeks pass, then months. The familiar rhythm that governs most ecosystems on Earth becomes stretched almost beyond recognition. In many environments, such prolonged darkness would fracture the foundation of life itself. Here it has become part of the architecture. The structure supporting that life is remarkably simple. Beneath the ice, microscopic algae grow along the frozen underside when light eventually returns. These algae form the base of a food web far shorter than those found in tropical oceans. Tiny crustaceans called copepods consume the algae, storing extraordinary reserves of fat within bodies scarcely larger than a thumbnail. Arctic cod feed on the copepods. Ringed seals feed on the cod. Above them stand the ocean's larger hunters. 5 primary links connect the foundation to the top. The simplicity is deceptive. In richer seas, hundreds of pathways may carry energy through the ecosystem. If one weakens, others often compensate. The Arctic offers no such luxury. Each connection bears weight. The copeps must arrive when food becomes available. The cod must find the copeps. The seals must find the cod. Every transfer matters. Remove a single link, and the consequences travel upward with unusual speed. What appears fragile is, in another sense, highly refined. Nothing excess remains. Every participant occupies a role that cannot easily be replaced. This is the central paradox of the Arctic Ocean. The darkness, the cold, the scarcity, and the ice seem like obstacles to life. They appear to be conditions that should limit possibility and reduce complexity. Yet over immense spans of time, those same pressures have acted less like barriers and more like tools. They have filtered, narrowed, and refined. They have removed inefficient solutions and rewarded precise ones. The ocean does not produce extraordinary predators despite these conditions. It produces them because of them. The cold, the scarcity, the darkness, and the ice are not the background to the story. They are the process through which the story is made. There are Greenland sharks alive today, whose birth dates disappear into the same historical haze as kings, empires, and unfinished monuments. One individual swimming through Arctic water at this moment may have entered the world before the Pilgrims reached Plymouth Rock. Another may already have been alive when flames spread through the Great Fire of London. At the furthest edge of scientific estimates, a living shark could trace its lifetime back to the years when the white marble walls of the Taj Mahal were still rising from the earth. Human history, which often feels immense when measured against a single lifetime, becomes strangely compressed beside an animal that experiences centuries as a continuous biological present. For a long time, such age estimates seemed almost impossible to verify. Sharks leave behind none of the clear annual growth markers found in tree rings or certain fish bones. Their skeletons are built largely from cartilage, a material that keeps few reliable records of time. The answer emerged from an unexpected place deep within the eye. In the year 2016, researchers published a study in the journal Science examining crystalline proteins inside Greenland shark eye lenses. These proteins form at birth and remain unchanged throughout life, sealed away from the biological turnover occurring elsewhere in the body. By measuring radiocarbon signatures preserved within those tissues, the team reconstructed ages unlike anything previously documented in a vertebrate. The oldest individual examined was estimated at 392 years old, with a substantial margin of uncertainty that pushed the upper boundary beyond 5 centuries. Even the most conservative interpretation places the Greenland shark in a category almost entirely its own. The bowhead whale, itself a remarkable survivor of Arctic waters, reaches documented ages exceeding 2 centuries. The Galapagos tortoise, another emblem of longevity, may approach roughly 175 years. The Greenland shark extends beyond both, creating a lifespan so long that biological generations begin to overlap in unusual ways. A shark born during 1 century may still be alive, while several complete human family lineages have come and gone. Its pace reflects that timescale. Growth occurs at approximately 1 centimeter per year. Seasons pass, ice forms and retreats, migrations rise and fade across the ocean, and the shark lengthens by little more than the width of a fingertip. Sexual maturity arrives at around 150 years of age. A Greenland shark reproducing for the first time has already surpassed the lifespan achieved by nearly every human who has ever existed. The body carrying this extraordinary chronology is substantial. Individuals may reach 6 meters in length and approach 1,000 kilograms in mass. Yet despite that size, there is little urgency in the way they move. The surrounding water rests near -1.8 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill most shark species within a matter of hours. The Greenland shark persists there continuously. Its heart beats only a few times each minute, digestion unfolds slowly over days. Tissue maintenance proceeds with a patience that mirrors the animal itself. What appears at first to be sluggishness is in fact a profound adaptation to scarcity. The Arctic offered very little excess energy, and over immense stretches of evolutionary time, the shark became perfectly calibrated to that limitation. It survives not by acquiring more, but by needing less. That strategy reaches all the way into its genetic code. In the year 2024, scientists completed a full sequencing of the Greenland shark genome and identified multiple copies of genes associated with inflammation control and DNA repair. The architecture of longevity appeared woven directly into its chromosomes. The cold shaped muscle and metabolism, but it also shaped inheritance itself, writing endurance into the biological language passed from one generation to the next. In the deep Arctic, age is not simply a consequence of survival. It has become a defining feature of the animal's design. Attached to the eye of a Greenland shark is often a small passenger that spends its entire life feeding from the animal it inhabits. The parasite is a copepod known as Omatocoda elongata. It anchors itself directly to the cornea, drawing nourishment from delicate eye tissue while the shark continues its slow passage through Arctic water. In many individuals, the copepod produces a faint bioluminescent glow. Against the immense darkness of depth, a dim point of living light hangs where a functioning eye should be. The consequence is remarkable in its simplicity. Most Greenland sharks are severely vision impaired in at least one eye. Many are impaired in both. Some are likely functionally blind. In most marine predators, such damage would be catastrophic. For the Greenland shark, it appears to matter very little. Vision occupies only a minor role in an environment where light itself is scarce. Long before the parasite arrived, the ocean had already reduced the usefulness of sight. The shark survives not because it overcame blindness, but because it evolved within a world where seeing was never the most important skill. Its awareness emerges from a different collection of senses, operating together in constant silence. Along the broad surface of its body runs the lateral line, a sensory network capable of detecting subtle pressure disturbances moving through water. Every swimming fish, every turning seal, every drifting object leaves behind tiny signatures of motion. The shark reads these disturbances the way another animal might read a trail across fresh snow. Around its snout, specialized organs detect faint electrical fields produced by muscle contractions and nervous systems. Every living creature generates these signals continuously. Even hidden prey cannot completely conceal the electrical rhythm of life. Then there is smell, perhaps the shark's most powerful sense of all. Molecules released into the water drift across extraordinary distances, carried by currents through darkness. The shark follows these invisible traces patiently, assembling a picture of the world from fragments carried through the sea. What emerges from that sensory landscape is an animal far less selective than many predators. Examination of Greenland shark stomach contents has revealed ringed seals, bearded seals, squid, octopus, Greenland halibut, Atlantic salmon, beluga whale blubber, and narwhal remains. More unexpectedly, researchers have documented reindeer tissue, horse remains, and even polar bear material. One particularly famous finding, reported during the first decade of the 21st century, involved polar bear tissue discovered within a shark's stomach. Whether the bear had been hunted or scavenged remains unresolved. The shark itself offered no distinction. In an ecosystem where calories arrive unpredictably, opportunity matters more than category. This flexibility extends beyond scavenging. Biologists have proposed that Greenland sharks may position themselves near river mouths during periods when migrating caribou cross northern waterways. The strategy resembles that of a crocodile more than that of a typical shark. Rather than searching actively, the animal waits at the precise point where prey must eventually enter the water. Time performs much of the work. The hunter simply remains present long enough for circumstance to arrive. The same principle appears in the long-standing mystery of how such a slow animal captures agile seals. Greenland sharks rarely exceed the pace of a leisurely walk, yet seals regularly appear among their prey. One leading explanation suggests an approach from below, where darkness conceals movement. The shark rises gradually, reducing pressure disturbance to nearly imperceptible levels. A seal resting or drifting in low visibility may detect nothing unusual until the final instant. Speed plays almost no role. Precision and timing replace it entirely. Everything about the Greenland shark's hunting method reflects the same philosophy. It does not spend energy pursuing prey across great distances. It does not rely on bursts of power or rapid pursuit. Instead, it occupies the ocean with extraordinary persistence, sensing, waiting, and responding when opportunity enters reach. In that sense, the shark behaves almost like a feature of the environment itself, another patient element within the Arctic system, moving slowly enough that scarcity ceases to be an obstacle and becomes part of the strategy. If there is a single principle running beneath every predator in the Arctic Ocean, it begins not with teeth, speed, intelligence, or size. It begins with chemistry. Hidden within the water itself is a condition that quietly shapes every life form capable of surviving here. The ocean appears austere from above, yet at the molecular level it contains an unusual abundance. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, and near negative 1.8 degrees Celsius, Arctic seawater ranks among the most oxygen-rich marine environments on Earth. Every liter carries an unusually large reserve of the fuel that animal tissues require to function. At first glance, this seems like an advantage without consequence. More oxygen suggests easier survival. Yet the Arctic rarely offers a benefit without attaching a cost to it. The same cold that enriches the water with oxygen also slows the machinery of life. Biochemical reactions proceed more gradually as temperatures fall. Enzymes responsible for releasing energy from food operate with reduced efficiency. Muscles contract more slowly. Cellular processes stretch outward in time. Life gains access to abundant oxygen while simultaneously losing much of its ability to use energy quickly. For warm-blooded animals, an additional challenge appears. Water removes heat from the body far faster than air. Maintaining a stable internal temperature in near freezing seas requires a continuous investment of calories. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat carries an energetic price. The ocean provides oxygen generously, but it demands payment in the form of metabolic effort. Over immense evolutionary timescales, this pressure produced an unusual outcome. The Arctic gradually erased the middle ground. Predators drifting toward moderate strategies found themselves trapped between conflicting demands. Generating heat required energy. Conserving energy meant sacrificing heat. The compromise satisfied neither requirement well enough. Generation after generation, the ocean applied the same test. The survivors separated into two distinct solutions. Some species committed fully to warmth. They evolved dense insulation, specialized circulation systems, and bodies capable of preserving internal heat with extraordinary precision. Their lives became energetically expensive, but their tissues remained active, responsive, and powerful, even in extreme cold. Others moved in the opposite direction. Rather than resist the temperature around them, they surrendered to it. Their bodies slowed, their energy requirements collapsed. They ceased paying the immense caloric cost of maintaining warmth and instead matched the ocean itself. The Greenland shark represents one side of that divide. Its body functions close to the temperature of the surrounding water. Its metabolism proceeds with extraordinary restraint. Every aspect of its biology reflects conservation. At the other end stand the great marine mammals, insulated, warm-blooded, and metabolically intense. They spend enormous amounts of energy simply remaining what they are. Scarcity amplifies this separation. Much of the Arctic food web ultimately depends on a seasonal bloom of ice algae that may persist for only 6 to 8 weeks each year. During that brief period, energy enters the system in meaningful quantities. Everything above must capture, store, or convert enough of that energy to endure the long interval that follows. Animals that waste calories rarely persist across repeated winters. Efficiency is not merely advantageous here, it is inseparable from survival. Even prey reflects the influence of the cold. Arctic marine animals carry substantial reserves of blubber, dense stores of chemical energy locked within fat. In low temperatures, these reserves become essential for insulation and endurance. As a result, a successful hunt often yields far more calories than an equivalent prey animal from warmer seas. Each opportunity is rarer, but each reward is greater. This is what it means to say that the Arctic produces extreme predators. The ocean functions as a continuous filter operating across hundreds of thousands of years. Every generation faced the same pressures. Slight inefficiencies accumulated consequences. Small disadvantages became decisive. The animals present today are not random inhabitants of a cold environment. They are the remaining outcomes after countless alternatives disappeared. The cold served as the filter. Scarcity served as the forge. What remains carries the shape of both. A young orca does not inherit its entire life from instinct. It inherits stories. Not stories in words, but in repeated actions, remembered routes, shared sounds, and techniques practiced so often that they become traditions. Long before an orca becomes a hunter, it spends years inside a society that is already teaching it how to survive. This may be the most important thing to understand about the animal. An adult can reach 9 meters in length and weigh more than 5,000 kilograms, yet its true advantage lies elsewhere. The defining feature of the orca is not size, it is knowledge. Hidden within the folds of the orca brain are spindle neurons, also known as von Economo neurons. For many years, these specialized cells were believed to exist only in humans and great apes. They are associated with rapid social judgment, self-awareness, emotional processing, and the ability to navigate complex relationships within a group. Orcas possess them in remarkable abundance. The significance becomes visible, not in anatomy, but in behavior. An orca rarely acts as an isolated individual. Nearly everything it does occurs within a social framework that extends across generations. For this reason, a pod is not merely a collection of animals occupying the same water. It functions more like a culture. Mothers pass information to offspring. Grandmothers continue guiding families decades after reproduction ends. Hunting techniques, vocal dialects, preferred prey, migration timing, and social rituals vary between populations. Two pods living within the same ocean may sound entirely different from one another. They may target different prey species. They may even interpret the same environment through different learned traditions. The differences are not genetic, they are cultural. This becomes especially apparent during hunting. Many mammal hunting populations spend much of their daily lives communicating through whistles, clicks, and calls. Yet, when the hunt begins, silence often takes over. Researchers studying transient pods have documented approaches conducted with extraordinary acoustic restraint. The usual sounds disappear. Communication shifts to subtle, close-range signals beyond the awareness of distant prey. The behavior resembles a practiced discipline rather than an automatic response. Young orcas learn it from older ones. Knowledge accumulated through previous hunts becomes part of the next generation's education. The sophistication of these strategies appears most clearly in encounters with large prey. Against bowhead whales, pods have been observed acting as coordinated barriers, positioning themselves to restrict movement and gradually force the whale toward shallower coastal waters. Rather than relying on strength alone, they manipulate geography. During encounters with narwhals, groups exploit predictable escape responses, steering individuals into areas where maneuverability becomes limited. Along ice edges, seals resting on floating platforms face a different challenge. Multiple orcas may swim in precise formation beneath a flow, generating a synchronized surge that destabilizes the surface and slides the seal into open water. The wave itself becomes a hunting tool. What makes these behaviors particularly remarkable is their capacity for change. In Antarctic waters, researchers documented populations adapting when traditional prey became less available. New hunting methods emerged within a single generation. Individuals experimented with unfamiliar approaches. Some attempts failed, others succeeded. Effective techniques spread through the pod and became part of the collective repertoire. Scientists studying the phenomenon often found themselves using language, usually reserved for human learning. Observation, adjustment, innovation, and teaching all appeared within the process. For much of recorded history, extensive sea ice limited the movement of orcas into the farthest reaches of the Arctic. Physical barriers restricted access to regions where other predators had evolved under different conditions. As those barriers have gradually weakened, orcas have begun arriving earlier in the season and extending their range farther north. They enter carrying not only powerful bodies, but accumulated cultural memory, generations of learned behavior moving through the ocean in living form. In many places, the arrival of an orca pod introduces something more than a predator. It introduces an intelligence that continues adapting while it hunts. Not every predator changes an ecosystem through the animals it catches. Some reshape entire populations without making contact at all. A whale surfaces in the distance. A faint call passes through the water. A familiar acoustic signature drifts across a migration route, and hundreds of animals begin adjusting their behavior. Feeding patterns shift. Travel paths bend away from old directions. Time that might have been spent eating is spent listening instead. In ecology, this phenomenon is known as a non-consumptive effect, the measurable influence a predator exerts simply by existing nearby. Nothing is hunted, nothing is killed, yet the consequences spread through the ecosystem all the same. Long before satellite tags and acoustic monitoring arrays existed, Inuit communities had already recognized the pattern. The word Arlarajuk translates roughly as the fear of killer whales. It is not a modern term created in response to recent environmental change. It is ancient, carried through generations of observation. Embedded within the word is the understanding that the presence of an orca alters the behavior of other animals long before any attack occurs. What traditional knowledge recorded through experience, modern science eventually quantified through data. Across Arctic waters, researchers have documented these responses repeatedly. Narwhals alter the depths at which they feed. Belugas abandoned feeding areas that had been used reliably for years. Bowhead whales modify migration routes established over centuries. Remarkably, these changes often occur without a single confirmed predation event. The acoustic presence of orcas alone is enough. Studies conducted through collaborations involving the University of Alaska and Fisheries and Oceans Canada found that bowhead whales responded to detected orca activity by moving toward thicker ice and shallower coastal environments. The whales reacted not to sight, but to sound. Long before an orca entered visual range, information carried through water had already changed their decisions. The cost of these responses accumulates quietly. A vigilant animal is not an efficient animal. Physiological systems that evolved to respond to danger become activated more frequently and remain active for longer periods. Cortisol levels rise. Immune function may decline. Reproductive success can decrease. Energy expenditure increases. A narwhal spending an Arctic season in heightened acoustic awareness feeds less effectively than one occupying undisturbed habitat. Calories that might have supported growth, maintenance, or reproduction are diverted elsewhere. Over time, those losses become measurable. The effect operates across entire populations. A weaker calf is born. A migration arrives later than usual. Feeding opportunities become less productive. Survival rates decline gradually rather than dramatically. In this way, the influence of a predator extends beyond direct mortality. Teeth remove individuals. Fear reshapes the conditions under which entire populations live. Ecologists sometimes describe this process as a landscape of fear. The phrase refers not to geography in the traditional sense, but to a living map of perceived risk. Regions that appear identical on a chart may be experienced very differently by the animals moving through them. One corridor becomes avoided, another becomes preferred. Distances lengthen, habitats shift. The ocean remains physically unchanged, yet its behavioral geography transforms. The arrival of orcas in greater numbers has made these patterns increasingly visible. Inuit hunters in parts of the Canadian Arctic have reported narwhals and bowheads appearing in different places than those used by previous generations. Routes that supported subsistence hunting for thousands of years no longer function in quite the same way. The animals have not disappeared, they have moved. Their decisions now reflect a changing balance between feeding opportunity and predation risk. What makes this especially remarkable is that the narwhal is not merely reacting to these pressures. It is one of the most specialized animals in the Arctic, carrying within its own body a sensory adaptation unlike anything else in the ocean, an instrument shaped by the same cold waters that shaped every predator and prey surrounding it. From a distance, the narwhal's tusk appears almost ornamental, a strange flourish added to an already unusual animal. For centuries, observers struggled to understand it. Sailors carried tusks back to Europe as treasures. Scholars proposed theories ranging from weapons to tools for breaking ice. Some imagined it as a device for combat between rivals. Others believed it served as a display structure, little more than a biological banner. The truth proved far stranger than any of those explanations, because the tusk is not primarily something the narwhal uses to act upon the world. It is something the narwhal uses to perceive it. The narwhal, Monodon monoceros, whose name translates roughly as one tooth, one horn, belongs to an exceptionally small group of whales that never leave the Arctic. Alongside the beluga and the bowhead, it spends its entire existence in the northern seas surrounding Greenland, Canada, and Svalbard. Its life unfolds among drifting ice, shifting currents, and waters that remain hostile throughout the year. Within that environment, the tusk emerges as one of the most specialized sensory organs ever evolved by a marine mammal. Despite its appearance, the tusk is neither a horn nor a conventional weapon. It is the upper left canine tooth, grown outward through the lip and extending forward in a distinctive spiral. The twist follows a consistent, left-handed corkscrew pattern and may reach lengths approaching 3 meters. The corresponding right canine almost always remains hidden within the skull. On rare occasions, both teeth erupt, producing the extraordinary sight of a double tusk extending from the same animal. Its true function remained uncertain until detailed anatomical studies transformed the way scientists viewed it. Research published during the second decade of the 21st century revealed a structure saturated with sensory tissue. The tusk contains millions of nerve endings connected through countless microscopic tubules. These tiny channels run from the porous outer surface toward the living pulp at the center, allowing seawater to interact directly with sensory receptors. Rather than being sealed away from the environment, the tusk is intimately connected to it. Through this remarkable arrangement, the narwhal gathers information from the surrounding ocean. Variations in salinity, subtle temperature changes, and shifts in pressure become detectable. The animal effectively samples the physical properties of the water around it. Where another predator might rely primarily on sight or smell, the narwhal reads gradients and boundaries. The ocean becomes a field of information, continuously flowing across the surface of its tooth. This sensitivity accompanies an equally extraordinary diving lifestyle. Narwhals routinely descend to depths of roughly 1,500 meters, approaching a vertical distance comparable to a mile. A single dive may last up to 25 minutes. Far below the surface, Greenland halibut and Arctic cod occupy deeper layers of the ocean during winter months. The narwhal follows them downward, crossing invisible transitions where water masses of different origins meet and overlap. Its tusk functions as a guide through a world where landmarks do not exist. The hunt itself remains largely hidden. Unlike predators armed with rows of teeth, the narwhal possesses no obvious equipment for grasping prey. Evidence suggests it feeds through suction, drawing fish inward with a powerful vacuum motion. Because this behavior occurs in darkness at extreme depth, direct observations remain exceptionally rare. Much of what scientists understand comes from stomach contents and indirect evidence gathered after the fact. When danger enters the equation, the same animal, capable of descending into the deep, often retreats in the opposite direction. Upon detecting orcas, narwhals frequently move toward dense pack ice, threading themselves into spaces that larger predators struggle to navigate. The choice carries risks of its own. Entrapment beneath shifting ice can be fatal, yet the refuge remains valuable. As Arctic ice becomes thinner and less extensive, those protected corridors narrow. Today, the global population is estimated at roughly 123,000 mature individuals. Researchers working among Arctic ice have described the sound of large narwhal groups moving beneath the frozen surface as something balanced between machinery and music. A chorus of clicks, whistles, and echoes carried through the water by animals, navigating a world they sense in ways few others can. Most whales spend their lives searching for openings in the sea. The bowhead whale carries its own solution with it. Beneath a rounded forehead lies one of the most specialized structures ever produced by marine evolution. A skull so massive and so heavily reinforced that it transforms solid ice into a temporary obstacle rather than a barrier. In a world where breathing often depends on reaching the surface through frozen water, the bowhead does not wait for opportunity. It creates it. Known scientifically as Balena mysticetus, the bowhead is one of only a handful of whale species that remain within Arctic and subarctic waters throughout the year. While many whales undertake immense migrations toward warmer seas, the bowhead remains committed to the north. Adults may reach lengths approaching 18 meters and masses near 100,000 kilograms. Yet even those impressive dimensions reveal only part of the story. Nearly 40% of the animal's body length is occupied by the skull itself, the highest skull-to-body ratio known in any animal. Evolution devoted an extraordinary amount of material to a single purpose. When a bowhead rises beneath sea ice, it pushes upward using the reinforced dome of its head. Ice approaching 60 centimeters thick can fracture under the force. The whale creates breathing holes where none previously existed, surfacing through expanses that appear completely sealed from above. In regions where open water may be absent for great distances, this ability becomes essential. The bowhead does not navigate around the frozen architecture of the Arctic. It physically reshapes it. The same pattern of specialization appears throughout its body. Beneath the skin lies the thickest layer of blubber found in any animal on Earth, reaching roughly 50 centimeters in depth. This immense insulation forms a thermal shield so effective that the whale maintains a stable internal temperature while moving through water cold enough to challenge almost every other large marine mammal. Winter conditions that would quickly overwhelm less specialized species become routine aspects of existence. The bowhead carries an entire Arctic survival system beneath its skin. Time has shaped the species as profoundly as cold. Confirmed ages exceeding 211 years place the bowhead among the longest-lived mammals ever documented. Some of the most remarkable evidence emerged not from laboratories, but from the bodies of living whales themselves. Researchers examining harvested individuals discovered stone and metal harpoon fragments embedded deep within blubber. Certain weapon designs identified from these fragments had not been manufactured since the 19th century. The whale had survived the original encounter, absorbed the injury into living tissue, and continued swimming for well over a century afterward. Its feeding strategy offers a striking contrast to the power suggested by its size. The bowhead does not pursue prey through bursts of speed. Instead, it drifts through dense concentrations of calanus, copepods, and other zooplankton with its enormous mouth open. Water flows inward and passes across vast curtains of baleen, filtering food from the surrounding sea. During productive feeding periods, a single whale may consume as much as 1,800 kilograms of zooplankton in a day. Energy enters the body through patience and efficiency rather than pursuit. Among large Arctic predators, few strategies waste less effort. Only one natural enemy regularly challenges an adult bowhead. Encounters with orcas reveal contests that can continue for hours. Pods coordinate movements, block escape routes, and gradually wear down their target. Success depends not only on strength, but on cooperation and endurance. The bowhead counters with size, resilience, and an intimate familiarity with the geography of ice. Neither participant relies on a single advantage. For centuries, bowheads endured pressures that reshaped entire populations. Commercial whaling reduced some groups by nearly 90%, yet survivors persisted. A whale alive today may carry physical evidence of encounters that occurred before modern nations existed in their current form. It may have outlived ships, industries, and generations of hunters. Now, within waters it has occupied for centuries, it shares the Arctic with new patterns of predation and movement, continuing a life measured not in decades, but in eras. The Arctic food web often appears to revolve around its largest predators. The eye is naturally drawn toward ancient sharks, immense whales, and highly intelligent hunters moving through the cold. Yet remove a single animal weighing little more than a large dog, and much of that towering structure begins to unravel. The ringed seal, Pusa hispida, is usually introduced as prey. In reality, it occupies a far more important role. It is both hunter and hunted, one of the most precisely adapted predators in the Arctic Ocean and the energetic foundation upon which many larger predators ultimately depend. An adult ringed seal typically weighs between 50 and 70 kilograms. It is the most abundant marine mammal in the Arctic, distributed across vast regions of sea ice and coastal water. Orcas consume it. Greenland sharks consume it. Belugas depend upon prey species supported by the same food pathways that sustain it. Energy moving upward through the Arctic ecosystem passes through the ringed seal so consistently that it functions almost like a biological currency. The larger hunters may dominate attention, but the seal quietly supports the economy of survival beneath them. Its importance begins with an ability no other Arctic marine mammal possesses. Throughout winter, when sea ice thickens and openings disappear, the ringed seal maintains access to the atmosphere by carving breathing holes from below. Using powerful foreclaws, it scrapes upward through ice repeatedly, preventing the openings from sealing shut. These holes become lifelines, connecting ocean and air. A single animal may maintain numerous openings, spread across a territory covering several square kilometers. Without them, survival becomes impossible. Managing these access points requires a remarkable degree of behavioral precision. A ringed seal does not return predictably to the same location every time it surfaces. Instead, it distributes its visits across multiple breathing holes, varying the sequence and timing. Predators waiting above the ice encounter a moving target rather than a fixed pattern. The seal transforms uncertainty into a defensive strategy, reducing the chances that patience alone will reveal its next appearance. Below the ice, it becomes an active hunter. Ringed seals regularly dive to depths approaching 300 meters and may remain submerged for as long as 45 minutes. Their primary targets include Arctic cod and other fish moving through the water column. Recent research using high-resolution dive tags revealed a level of behavioral flexibility once difficult to measure. The seals adjusted their foraging depths continuously, tracking prey concentrations as they shifted throughout the day. Rather than searching randomly, they followed the changing distribution of food with remarkable accuracy, responding almost in real time to where prey became most abundant. Even rest reflects the pressures surrounding them. Neurological studies suggest that exposed ringed seals may cycle through extremely brief sleep episodes, unlike the patterns observed in most mammals. Instead of entering long periods of complete unconsciousness, they alternate rapidly between states of sleep and alertness. The result is a lifestyle in which vigilance remains close at hand even during recovery. The architecture of rest itself has been reshaped by generations of predation. The next stage of the seal's life unfolds beneath the snow. Females construct concealed layers above breathing holes, hidden within drifts accumulated on stable sea ice. From above, these shelters blend into the surrounding landscape. Within them, pups remain insulated from wind and protected from immediate detection. For a brief period each spring, these young seals represent one of the richest concentrations of accessible energy anywhere in the Arctic. Numerous predators synchronize feeding opportunities around their availability. The timing is delicate. If ice forms late or develops poorly, snow layers become less stable. Collapse exposes pups prematurely to weather and predators. Mortality rises. The consequences do not remain confined to the seals themselves. Reduced pup survival means less energy entering higher levels of the food web. The effects ripple outward through species that may never interact directly with the ice above. The ringed seal is often described as prey because so many animals depend upon it. Yet, every detail of its biology reveals an accomplished predator, a specialist capable of hunting, navigating, resting, and reproducing within conditions that permit little room for error. In many ways, it is the living engine at the center of the Arctic system, converting the ocean's resources into forms that sustain much of the life surrounding it. There is a boundary running through the Arctic Ocean that no animal can see. It has no color, no texture, and no visible edge. A diver passing through it would encounter no wall and no line drawn across the water. Yet this hidden division separates two different worlds. Oceanographers call it the halocline, a layer where salinity changes sharply with depth, creating a difference in density strong enough to limit mixing between the water above and the water below. Stretching across much of the Arctic basin, it typically lies somewhere between roughly 50 and 200 meters beneath the surface, quietly organizing life throughout the ocean. Above this boundary exists the Arctic most familiar to its inhabitants. Here, the water remains exceptionally cold and comparatively fresh. Seasonal productivity unfolds within this upper layer. Ice algae flourish when light returns. Copepods gather the energy released by those blooms. Arctic cod move through the water column. Ringed seals hunt among them. Narwhals often begin their dives here, and orcas conduct much of their hunting within these shallower regions. It is the active surface realm where most visible ecological interactions take place. Beneath the halocline, conditions change. Saltier water of Atlantic origin has gradually entered the Arctic from the south and settled below the fresher surface layer. This deeper water is paradoxically warmer than the ocean above it, though still profoundly cold by ordinary standards. Light fades away, seasonal fluctuations weaken. The environment becomes more stable, more predictable, and more isolated from the turbulence occurring overhead. During winter, Greenland halibut and concentrations of Arctic cod often occupy these depths. It is also the domain through which narwhals descend during their deepest foraging journeys. The Greenland shark spends much of its existence here. Its unusual biology depends not only on cold temperatures, but on consistency. In deep water beneath the halocline, thermal conditions may remain nearly unchanged across years and even decades. The shark's slow metabolism, extended lifespan, and deliberate movements are all supported by an environment where change arrives with extraordinary reluctance. While the surface world experiences shifting seasons and migrating ice, the depths remain comparatively constant. Yet even this hidden structure is not immune to transformation. As the Arctic warms, Atlantic water has begun pushing farther north and exerting greater influence on the basin. Oceanographers refer to this process as Atlantification. The deeper, saltier layer gradually expands its reach, altering the position of the halocline itself. As the boundary shifts, prey distributions shift with it. Fish concentrate in different locations. Migration patterns adjust. The spatial relationships connecting predators and prey begin to reorganize. For this reason, many researchers describe the Arctic as a two-layer ocean. The phrase captures more than a physical division. Different temperatures occupy each layer. Different prey, communities, dominate them. Different hunting strategies emerge within them. Some animals specialize in one realm and rarely leave it. Others move between both with remarkable precision. Narwhals cross the boundary repeatedly during deep feeding dives. Greenland sharks spend much of their time below it. Orcas remain primarily above, influencing the movement of animals that travel through both worlds. Far beneath the halicline, the environment becomes stranger still. Beyond depths exceeding 1,000 meters, pressure rises above 100 atmospheres. Temperatures stabilize near -1 degree Celsius. Seasonal cycles lose their influence. Surface storms never penetrate. Currents slow. In many places, this may be among the most thermally stable environments on Earth. Conditions remain so consistent that an animal occupying the same region for decades could experience remarkably little variation. Within that stability, life continues. The Greenland shark is one inhabitant, moving through darkness that remains largely unchanged across generations. Yet, it is not alone. The deeper Arctic contains communities existing far beyond the range of ordinary observation, occupying waters that humans have explored only rarely. Much of this realm remains imperfectly documented, hidden beneath the visible Arctic and separated from it by a boundary that, despite its invisibility, shapes the entire ocean above. Far beneath the shifting surface layers of the Arctic Ocean, there comes a depth where the last trace of daylight disappears forever. Not dim light, not twilight, but complete absence. Beyond roughly 200 meters, sunlight never arrives. Descending farther still, past 1,000 meters, pressure climbs beyond 100 atmospheres, and the water settles near -1 degree Celsius. Seasons lose their meaning here. The return of spring changes nothing. The arrival of winter changes nothing. The deep Arctic exists in a state of remarkable constancy, separated from the rhythms above by distance, pressure, and darkness. For much of human history, this realm remained almost entirely inaccessible. Even now, only fragments of it have been directly observed. Recent exploration has begun revealing how much remained hidden. During an ocean census expedition conducted in 2024, researchers descended along the Knipovich Ridge to depths approaching 2,776 meters. What appeared in the lights of remotely operated vehicles was not an empty abyss, but a living landscape populated by organisms that had never been formally recorded. Red sea stars stood out against the dark seafloor like scattered embers. Feather stars moved across the sediment, using the same delicate arms that captured food from passing currents. Deep sea anemones rested with their tentacles drawn inward, conserving energy in a place where every calorie matters. The deeper these expeditions travel, the more the Arctic reveals ecosystems operating according to rules very different from those of the surface ocean. In certain regions, methane-rich fluids seep upward through cracks in the seabed. These cold seeps form biological islands in the darkness. Here, bacteria do not depend on sunlight to produce organic matter. Instead, they draw energy from methane and hydrogen sulfide through chemosynthesis, transforming chemical compounds into the foundation of entire food webs. Around these seep communities, live organisms found nowhere else. Tube worms cluster around active vents. Specialized clams host symbiotic bacteria within their tissues. Ice worms and other highly adapted species occupy habitats that remain disconnected from the sunlit world above. Moving slowly across portions of the seafloor are creatures that seem borrowed from a much older Earth. Giant sea spiders belonging to the genus Colossendice extend legs wider than a dinner plate. Their movements are deliberate and economical. They wander across the sediment, searching for food, mates, and opportunity in a landscape where encounters may be separated by immense distances. Their evolutionary lineage stretches back hundreds of millions of years, linking the modern Arctic to oceans that existed long before mammals appeared. Suspended above this seafloor, sometimes encountered only briefly before vanishing again into darkness, drifts one of the least observed predators in the ocean. The giant phantom jellyfish, Stygia gigantea, possesses a bell reaching roughly 1 meter across and trailing ribbon-like arms extending up to 10 meters. Fewer than 120 confirmed sightings exist across all of recorded science. It appears most often in regions where productivity is low and competition is limited, occupying ecological space that few other large predators exploit. Much of its life remains unknown. Its feeding behavior, reproductive cycle, and population size are still subjects of uncertainty. The Greenland shark occasionally enters this deep world as well. Individuals have been recorded at depths exceeding 2,200 meters. Such depths place them within reach of cold seep ecosystems and the concentrated biomass that gathers around them. Whether these sharks regularly hunt in such environments remains unresolved. A shark that has lived for centuries may have crossed these dark landscapes countless times without a single human observer nearby to witness it. What makes this especially striking is how little of the deep Arctic has actually been mapped. In many respects, scientists possess more detailed maps of the surface of Mars than of vast regions of the Arctic seafloor. More charting has occurred during the past decade than during all previous centuries combined, yet enormous areas remain unexplored. Every expedition expands the known world slightly farther, revealing food webs, habitats, and predator relationships that challenge assumptions formed from the surface alone. The deeper Arctic is not an empty extension of the ocean above. It is an ancient realm of its own, still offering discoveries from a darkness that has endured unchanged for ages. Among all the predators inhabiting the Arctic Ocean, one of the most formidable rarely appears in the imagination first. Ancient sharks tend to claim attention. Massive whales follow close behind. Yet drifting through these cold waters is an animal whose dimensions exceed expectations so completely that it almost seems misplaced. The lion's mane jellyfish, Cyanea capillata, is not merely the largest jellyfish on Earth. In the Arctic, where environmental conditions allow it to reach its greatest proportions, it becomes one of the largest predatory structures in the entire ocean. A fully developed individual may possess a bell measuring approximately 2 4/10 meters across. Below that bell trails a curtain of tentacles documented at lengths approaching 36 5/10 meters. Measured from end to end, those tentacles extend farther than the longest blue whale ever reliably recorded. Unlike the whale, however, the jellyfish achieves this scale without muscles built for pursuit, without a complex nervous system, and without any recognizable form of strategic behavior. Its enormity emerges from a radically different solution to survival. Almost everything commonly associated with animal life is absent. There is no brain directing decisions. There is no heart circulating blood. There are no bones supporting a frame. Roughly 95% of its body consists of water. Its lifespan is astonishingly brief when compared with the centuries accumulated by some Arctic inhabitants. Within roughly a single year, it hatches, grows to extraordinary size, reproduces, and dies. The entire existence of an animal, longer than the largest whale, unfolds within a span shorter than a human calendar. Yet, simplicity should not be mistaken for weakness. The lion's mane remains a predator, and a remarkably effective one. Its hunting apparatus consists of as many as 1,200 tentacles, arranged in 8 primary clusters. Along those tentacles sit countless nematocysts, microscopic stinging structures functioning like spring-loaded harpoons. Contact alone triggers them. The mechanism requires no thought, no targeting, and no conscious response. A passing organism brushes a tentacle, and the stinging cells discharge instantly, injecting venom and immobilizing the victim. The range of prey is surprisingly broad. Zooplankton become entangled in the drifting curtain. Small fish encounter the invisible threads and lose the ability to escape. Crustaceans are captured in the same manner. Other jellyfish may also become prey. In the darkness of Arctic waters, the lion's mane possesses another unusual trait. It is capable of bioluminescence, producing light through chemical reactions within its tissues. The glow is faint, but in an ocean where darkness dominates much of the year, even faint light becomes part of the surrounding ecology. Its enormous size is not accidental. The same environmental mechanism shaping many Arctic predators is at work here as well. Cold temperatures, slow metabolism, growth proceeds more gradually. Biological processes unfold across extended timelines. In warmer seas, reproductive pressures often arrive before a jellyfish can achieve exceptional size. In colder waters, development stretches over a longer interval. The result is an animal that continues expanding for longer before its life cycle reaches completion. The Arctic does not restrict its growth. In a sense, it grants additional time for growth to continue. The hunting method reflects this same economy. A lion's mane jellyfish does not search for prey. It does not pursue. It does not select a destination. Carried by currents, it drifts through the water while its immense network of tentacles trails behind. Together, they form an almost invisible capture field, spanning an area larger than many urban intersections. Organisms swimming into that space receive no warning. The sting occurs instantly. Paralysis follows. The tentacles gradually transport captured prey toward the central mouth. Few predators expend less effort. The ocean supplies movement. The tentacles perform capture automatically. The nervous demands of planning, coordination, and pursuit have been almost entirely removed from the equation. What remains is perhaps the most extreme expression of efficiency found anywhere in the Arctic, a hunter that survives by eliminating nearly every biological expense possible and allowing the surrounding ocean to do much of the work on its behalf. Long before a beluga becomes visible, it is often heard. Sound reaches through Arctic water with remarkable efficiency, carrying information across distances where sight becomes unreliable. For generations, Inuit hunters traveling across northern waters described hearing belugas through the wooden hulls of their boats, a chorus of whistles, clicks, chirps, groans, buzzes, clangs, and trills drifting upward from below. This constant exchange of sound earned the species one of its most enduring names, the canary of the sea. Among Arctic predators, few animals are so deeply connected to the acoustic world. The beluga, Delphinapterus lucus, belongs to a very small group of whales that spend their entire lives within Arctic and subarctic waters. While many whales migrate vast distances between feeding and breeding grounds, the beluga remains closely tied to northern seas. Its environment is one where darkness often lasts for months, where shifting ice obscures vision, and where prey may be hidden beyond the reach of sight. In such a world, hearing becomes more valuable than looking. Its anatomy reflects this reality in unusual ways. Unlike other whale species, the beluga possesses fully unfused neck vertebrae. Rather than moving as a rigid extension of the body, the head can rotate independently. A beluga can look upward, downward, sideways, and even behind itself while continuing forward. This flexibility allows it to navigate narrow passages between ice formations with extraordinary precision. Where larger whales may be restricted by body orientation, the beluga explores its surroundings with a freedom more reminiscent of a terrestrial animal. At the front of the head sits another remarkable adaptation. The rounded forehead, known as the melon, functions as a sophisticated acoustic instrument. Far from being a static structure, it can be physically reshaped by surrounding muscles. By altering its form, the beluga adjusts the direction and focus of outgoing sound waves. The result is an echolocation system that can be modified in real time according to circumstance. The whale is not merely producing sound, it is actively sculpting it. Researchers studying hunting behavior have documented a sequence that resembles a careful conversation between the predator and its environment. A beluga often begins by moving slowly through the water while listening. During this stage, passive acoustic information guides its search. The whale gathers clues from surrounding sounds without announcing its own presence. Once prey has been localized, behavior changes. Movement becomes more energetic. Direction shifts become sharper. Active echolocation pulses are introduced, allowing precise tracking of individual targets. The animal transitions smoothly between listening and broadcasting, combining both approaches during a single hunt. These hunts can extend to impressive depths. Belugas regularly dive hundreds of meters below the surface and may remain submerged for as long as 25 minutes. Arctic cod, capelin, squid, and shrimp form important components of their diet. Long-term tagging studies conducted in the eastern Beaufort Sea have revealed thousands of dives occurring throughout a single year. Depth preferences shift with the seasons. During warmer months, prey often occupies shallower waters. During winter, fish descend deeper into the water column, and the belugas follow. More than 21,000 belugas inhabit the eastern Canadian Arctic year-round. Within these populations, evidence suggests the presence of cultural memory. Pods return repeatedly to specific estuaries and migration corridors across decades. These patterns appear too consistent to be explained by instinct alone. Researchers also suspect that individual belugas possess distinctive vocal signatures recognizable to other members of the pod. Communication may function not merely at the group level, but at the level of individual identity. This rich acoustic world becomes especially striking when danger appears. When orcas enter an area, belugas often abandon their usual vocal behavior. Calls cease. The whistles disappear. The complex soundscape collapses into silence. An animal that spends much of its life communicating through sound responds to threat by removing itself from the acoustic landscape altogether. The same sensory sophistication that allows successful hunting also provides a means of survival. The beluga demonstrates a very different path through the Arctic than the drifting efficiency of a jellyfish or the patient endurance of a shark. Its strength lies in information. in the ability to transform sound into a detailed map of an environment where visibility is often limited. Across the dark waters of the north, it listens, responds, remembers, and moves through a world constructed not primarily from light, but from echoes. In the deepest regions of the Arctic Ocean, darkness is not simply the absence of sunlight, it is the permanent condition of existence. Yet these waters are not truly dark. Tiny flashes appear and disappear. Faint pulses drift through the water column. Brief glows shimmer and vanish. Life here has learned to manufacture its own illumination, and the result is an ecosystem where light itself becomes part of the hunt. Bioluminescence, the biological production of light through chemical reactions within living tissue, is astonishingly common in the deep Arctic. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 3/4 and 9/10 of deep-sea animals produce light in one form or another. In an environment where sunlight never arrives, this ability becomes extraordinarily useful. The same glow may attract prey, confuse predators, identify mates, or transmit information. A single physical phenomenon serves multiple purposes simultaneously, woven into nearly every aspect of survival. Sometimes the source of the light is unexpected. The copepod Omatacoida elongata, attached to the cornea of many Greenland sharks, possesses bioluminescent properties. The parasite feeds upon the eye tissue of its host, yet its faint glow may create an unintended advantage. One leading hypothesis suggests that curious animals investigating the small point of light could drift closer to the shark itself. The irony is striking. The shark's damaged eye, no longer useful for vision, may become part of a hunting system built from attraction rather than sight. Elsewhere in the deep Arctic swims a jellyfish called Crossota norvegica. It is remarkably small, measuring less than 2½ centimeters across, yet it demonstrates one of the most elegant visual tricks in the ocean. Its body is a vivid red. Near the surface, such coloration would be conspicuous. At great depth, however, red wavelengths disappear almost completely. Water absorbs them long before they can travel far. As a result, red becomes functionally black. The jellyfish vanishes into the darkness while retaining the ability to produce its own bioluminescent glow. It is illuminated and hidden at the same time. This use of red pigmentation appears throughout the deep Arctic. Recent exploration has documented red sea stars, red crustaceans, red jellyfish, and numerous other organisms occupying depths exceeding 2,000 meters. All rely upon the same optical principle. In a world where red light cannot survive the journey through water, red bodies become exceptionally effective camouflage. The strategy has evolved repeatedly because the underlying physics remains constant. Light also influences predator and prey relationships in more subtle ways. Ecologists describe a phenomenon known as the burglar alarm effect. When a small bioluminescent animal is captured, the struggle may trigger a burst of light. That signal does not merely reveal the prey, it can attract larger predators from the surrounding darkness. The result is a chain reaction of attention. A hunter catches prey, the prey emits light, and the light summons something larger. The original predator suddenly becomes visible. In this way, bioluminescence can punish success as easily as it rewards it. Certain Arctic squid have transformed this principle into a defensive weapon. Some release clouds of glowing fluid when threatened. Unlike ordinary ink, these luminous bursts create bright distractions that disrupt pursuit. Other species take a more unusual approach. Portions of their glowing arms can detach and remain attached to an attacker. The predator leaves carrying a source of light on its own body, effectively marked within an environment where concealment is often essential. the hunter becomes easier for other hunters to locate. Across these depths, bioluminescence functions almost like a language composed of flashes, pulses, and signals. Some animals use it to communicate, some use it to deceive, some use it to disappear. Others use it to draw attention. The same glow can represent danger, opportunity, camouflage, attraction, or escape depending upon who observes it and from what distance. In the Arctic deep, light is not merely illumination, it is behavior made visible, a living exchange of information carried through water that sunlight never reaches. Here, even darkness has developed its own vocabulary. For most of recent history, the high Arctic possessed a form of protection that no animal created and no animal controlled. It was built from geography and temperature. Vast expanses of sea ice occupied narrow passages leading into northern waters, forming barriers that could not easily be crossed. Beyond those barriers lived whales, seals, and fish that evolved within an ocean where one particular predator remained largely absent. The orca existed at the margins of this world, powerful enough to dominate almost any marine ecosystem, yet physically prevented from entering much of the Arctic itself. The obstacle was not competition, it was ice. Thick sea ice restricted movement through the eastern and western Canadian Arctic, closing routes that would otherwise have allowed killer whales to travel farther north. For generations, this frozen architecture shaped the predator hierarchy of the region. Animals such as narwhals, belugas, and bowhead whales developed within conditions where encounters with orcas were relatively uncommon compared with many other marine environments. During recent decades, that barrier has begun to retreat. Since the late 1970s, the minimum extent of Arctic sea ice has declined by roughly 13% per decade. The cumulative result is immense. An area comparable in scale to Alaska is no longer covered by year-round ice. Passageways once obstructed for much of the year now remain open for longer periods. Water that previously functioned as a protected refuge has become increasingly accessible. The ecological consequences are becoming visible across the Arctic. A study published in 2025 examined 2 decades of killer whale observations in the eastern Canadian Arctic, analyzing records collected between 2002 and 2023. The pattern was consistent. Orcas were arriving earlier in spring, remaining later into autumn, and extending their range farther north. Their movements closely tracked the retreating ice edge. Regions that were once inaccessible gradually entered the operational range of one of the most sophisticated predators in the ocean. The animals encountered there face a challenge unlike many experienced elsewhere. Much of the Arctic evolved under comparatively low predation pressure from killer whales. Narwhals, belugas, and bowheads possess defenses suited to their historical environment, but those defenses were not shaped by generations of regular exposure to coordinated orca tactics. The synchronized wave surges, cooperative herding behaviors, and highly flexible hunting strategies characteristic of killer whales represent pressures that many Arctic prey populations have encountered only recently. Among the most vulnerable is the narwhal. Its most reliable refuge has traditionally been dense pack ice. When danger approaches, narwhals often retreat into regions where large dorsal fins restrict pursuit. The strategy depends upon thick, persistent ice remaining available. As ice cover diminishes, the refuge contracts. The predator expands while the shelter retreats. Both changes occur simultaneously, reshaping the balance that once favored escape. Bowhead whales reveal similar shifts. Long-term satellite tracking has shown migration routes adjusting in response to killer whale presence. Areas historically used for travel are increasingly avoided when orcas are detected acoustically. Detours add distance to already demanding migrations. Additional distance requires additional energy. The consequences accumulate gradually through altered movement patterns rather than immediate mortality. Long before satellite transmitters documented these changes, indigenous communities had already observed them. Inuit hunters in Nunavut reported shifts in prey distribution during the 1990s, noting that familiar patterns were changing. Scientific monitoring later confirmed many of the same trends. The word Arlarijuk, describing fear associated with killer whales, has existed within Inuit knowledge for generations. Yet the circumstances surrounding that fear are evolving as the animals themselves appear in regions where they were previously rare or absent within living memory. What makes this expansion especially significant is that orcas do not arrive alone. They arrive carrying culture. Hunting techniques learned within one generation can persist through many others. Knowledge passes from mothers to offspring, accumulating across decades. Every successful adaptation becomes part of a growing behavioral library. As access to the Arctic increases, that library moves north as well. The result is not a temporary visitation. It is the gradual establishment of a new ecological presence within waters that were once protected by ice. The Arctic remains the same ocean in many respects, yet the boundaries that shaped it for centuries are shifting. Through those openings moves a predator whose greatest strength is not simply power or speed, but the ability to learn, remember, and carry those lessons wherever the ice allows it to go. Long before a whale breaks through ice, before a shark drifts through the deep water beneath the boundary layers of the ocean, before a predator learns a hunting strategy from its mother, another process has already been unfolding in silence. It takes place inside the nucleus of a cell, within strands of genetic material carried forward across uncountable generations. The Arctic leaves traces there as surely as it leaves traces in ice, currents, and stone. Its influence reaches into inheritance itself. The bowhead whale offers one of the clearest examples. When researchers sequenced the bowhead genome in the middle of the last decade, they found a collection of unusual genetic features associated with DNA repair, regulation of cell division, and resistance to cancer. This was more than a biological curiosity. A bowhead whale can live for well over 2 centuries while possessing vastly more cells than a human being. Every cell carries the possibility of mutation. Every additional cell creates another opportunity for cancer to emerge. Yet bowheads develop cancer at remarkably low rates. Somewhere within their genetic architecture, natural selection has produced systems capable of maintaining cellular order across spans of time that seem almost geological from a human perspective. A similar pattern appears in a very different animal. When the Greenland shark genome was sequenced, researchers found repeated copies of genes linked to inflammation control and DNA repair. The significance was not a single extraordinary mutation. It was the overall arrangement. The genome appeared structured around preserving stability over immense durations. The biological foundations of longevity were distributed throughout the chromosomes themselves, woven into the architecture of the organism, rather than concentrated in one isolated mechanism. The connection between these distant species begins with the environment they share. Near freezing water changes the pace of life at the molecular level. Many biochemical reactions proceed more slowly. Metabolic activity declines. Cells consume energy at different rates than they do in warmer seas. One consequence is a reduction in oxidative stress, the gradual accumulation of molecular damage produced during normal metabolism. Every organism experiences this process. Over time, proteins degrade, cellular machinery wears down, and genetic material acquires damage that must be repaired. In warmer environments, the pace of metabolism often accelerates the accumulation of that damage. In the Arctic, where cold governs nearly every aspect of existence, the process unfolds more slowly. Across a single season, the difference may seem modest. Across centuries, it becomes profound. The gap between a lifespan measured in decades and one measured in centuries is not the product of a single adaptation. It emerges from countless small advantages compounded over immense stretches of evolutionary time. The Greenland shark embodies this principle with unusual clarity. Its genome can be viewed as a historical record, a biological archive documenting what happens when extreme cold and chronic scarcity shape a lineage across millions of years. Every successful generation carried forward molecular solutions to problems imposed by the environment. Every unsuccessful strategy disappeared. What remains is written directly into the chromosomes of the animals still swimming through Arctic waters today. The narwhal reveals another dimension of this process. Genetic studies have identified adaptations associated with cardiovascular performance during deep diving. Variations affecting hemoglobin and myoglobin enhance the storage, transport, and delivery of oxygen under conditions that would challenge most mammals. The extraordinary descent into deep water is not merely a learned behavior or a physical skill. The capability exists within the animal's chemistry, encoded in genes inherited long before any individual narwhal takes its first dive. Seen from this perspective, the cold is not simply a setting, it participates in the creation of the animals themselves. It influences which genes persist, which mutations spread, and which biological designs endure. Across immense spans of evolutionary time, it reaches into every cell and quietly reshapes the future. The predators of the Arctic are not merely living within the cold. At the deepest molecular level, they are expressions of what the cold has been writing for millions of years. A season can hinge on a span of weeks. Across the Arctic Ocean, beneath drifting ice and above the deep layers where ancient currents move unseen, much of the predator hierarchy depends on a brief annual interval so concentrated in consequence that its effects ripple through every level of the ecosystem. The great hunters of these waters appear vastly different from one another, yet all are ultimately tethered to the same recurring pulse of life. The sequence begins when spring light returns after the long darkness. Illumination reaches the underside of stable sea ice, where ice algae begin to bloom across the frozen ceiling of the ocean. This bloom is modest in appearance, a thin, living layer spread across immense distances, yet it forms the foundation of everything that follows. Tiny drifting crustaceans, known as copepods, gather to exploit this sudden abundance. Their bodies fill with energy-rich lipids accumulated during the short productive season, transforming microscopic plant growth into concentrated biological fuel. As copepod numbers rise, Arctic cod gather to feed upon them. Schools of fish move through the water column, converting that stored energy into muscle and motion. Ringed seals follow. Their dives intersect with the shifting distributions of cod, and the abundance of prey allows adults to accumulate the reserves needed for reproduction and survival. By early spring, another critical event is underway. Ringed seal pups are born within protected snow layers constructed above breathing holes in stable sea ice during March and April. For a brief period, these pups represent one of the richest concentrations of accessible calories anywhere in the Arctic ecosystem. The consequences radiate outward. Greenland sharks emerge more frequently into productive hunting zones as seal densities increase. Belugas intensify feeding during the copepod-driven surge of biological activity. Orcas time their northward movements to coincide with the retreat of ice and the seasonal concentration of prey along the shifting ice edge. Animals separated by enormous distances and radically different lifestyles become synchronized through the same pulse of energy moving upward through the food web. This annual window lasts only 6 to 8 weeks. The brevity is important. In ecosystems with many overlapping pathways, disruptions can sometimes be absorbed. The Arctic possesses far fewer alternatives. The food chain remains remarkably short, each connection carrying substantial weight. A change affecting one level rapidly influences the others. The system gains efficiency through simplicity, yet that same simplicity creates sensitivity. When sea ice forms later than it once did, the effects begin long before predators encounter one another. Ringed seal layers may be built upon thinner, less stable ice. Some collapse prematurely. Exposure increases mortality among pups during the most vulnerable stage of life. Fewer surviving pups mean less energy entering higher trophic levels. The reduction is not confined to a single species. It propagates upward through seals, sharks, whales, and every predator dependent upon the seasonal abundance those pups represent. Researchers have documented measurable shifts in the timing of sea ice formation across recent decades. In several regions, ringed seal populations are producing fewer viable pups as conditions become less predictable. The seasonal pulse still occurs, but the window has narrowed. Its timing has become less reliable. The foundation remains present, yet it no longer arrives with the same consistency that shaped generations of Arctic life. None of the great predators have become less capable. The shark still carries the biological legacy of extraordinary longevity. The whales retain adaptations refined across immense spans of evolutionary time. The hunters remain what the Arctic produced. What is changing are the conditions that once guided every stage of their lives. Ice forms differently. Seasons shift. The rhythms that synchronized prey and predator drift from their historical patterns. In this ocean, survival has always depended on precision. For hundreds of thousands of years, that precision was calibrated to a recurring 6-week pulse of abundance. The pulse still returns, but it arrives within a world whose timing is slowly being rewritten, and every living thing connected to it moves in response. Not all archives are built from paper, stone, or digital records. Some drift silently through cold water, carrying centuries within their bodies. The Greenland shark belongs to that rare category of living things, whose existence spans periods of history normally separated into chapters. It does not remember the past in the way a human remembers. No animal carries memories across centuries, yet the shark preserves something equally remarkable. It carries a chemical record of the world that existed when it was born. Deep within each eye lies a lens assembled from crystalline proteins. Unlike many tissues in the body, these proteins form during early development and remain largely unchanged throughout life. Layer after layer is added, but the oldest material stays locked in place. Because those proteins incorporate chemical elements from the surrounding environment at the moment they form, they preserve a signature of the ocean existing at the shark's birth. The result is a biological timestamp written not in words or images, but in isotopes. When scientists began analyzing these lenses, they discovered that the chemistry preserved within them could reveal age with surprising precision. Radiocarbon concentrations contained in the oldest lens tissues reflected conditions present when the shark first entered the world. Among individuals born during the middle of the 20th century, researchers found a distinctive signal recognizable across the entire planet. Atmospheric nuclear weapons testing released enormous quantities of radioactive carbon into the environment. Winds carried it around the globe, oceans absorbed it, food webs incorporated it. The pulse eventually became embedded within the tissues of animals alive at the time. That signal remains preserved inside Greenland sharks still swimming today. The Cold War left traces not only in historical documents and abandoned military sites, but also within the biology of living Arctic predators. A shark born during that era carries evidence of those events in the same way a tree preserves information in growth rings. The implications grow stranger as the animals become older. Some Greenland sharks fall within age ranges, suggesting birth dates centuries in the past. A shark born around 1620 would have entered the Arctic Ocean before large portions of northern exploration had even begun. It would have inhabited these waters throughout the rise of commercial whaling, through periods when bowhead whale populations were reduced catastrophically, through the end of industrial hunting, through the beginning of scientific observation, and through every decade of modern environmental change. The animal itself does not recall those events, yet its body connects them into a single, uninterrupted biological timeline. The bowhead whale preserves history differently. Embedded harpoon heads discovered within living whales reveal encounters with hunters from another century. Iron became surrounded by tissue, then slowly encased through decades of healing and growth. The artifact remained while generations of people lived and disappeared. A surviving whale carried that moment forward through time, transforming a brief encounter into a century-long record. These animals are often described as symbols of Arctic antiquity, but the description understates what they truly represent. They are antiquity in physical form. Their tissues contain evidence of oceans that no longer exist in precisely the same state. Their bodies hold traces of temperatures, chemical compositions, and ecological conditions that have already passed into history. The Greenland shark is especially remarkable because its eye lens preserves a baseline. The chemistry locked inside reflects the Arctic as it was when the shark was young. Every comparison between that record and the present reveals how the ocean has changed across centuries. In this sense, each shark functions as a drifting scientific instrument assembled by evolution long before human beings established research stations or launched satellites. As the Arctic continues to transform, the value of such records becomes increasingly profound. The shark does not merely inhabit history, it carries history forward through the water, preserving fragments of vanished oceans within itself, a living archive moving slowly through a world that is changing far faster than it once did. If an observer could stand outside time and watch the Arctic Ocean conduct its work across thousands of years, the scene might resemble a vast natural experiment. The conditions remain largely the same: cold that slows life to unfamiliar rhythms, darkness that conceals more than it reveals, and scarcity that allows little room for waste. Yet the creatures that emerged from those pressures are strikingly different from one another. Faced with the same challenge, they arrived at solutions so distinct that they seem less like variations on a theme and more like separate answers to the same equation. The Greenland shark followed perhaps the most austere path. Rather than resisting the cold, it surrendered to it completely. Its body approaches the temperature of the surrounding water. Metabolism slows to an almost unimaginable degree. Growth unfolds so gradually that centuries pass before the animal reaches its greatest size. Activity is minimized. Energy expenditure is reduced wherever possible. In another environment, such a strategy might fail, But here it succeeds precisely because the shark requires so little. Survival is achieved not through speed, strength, or constant hunting, but through patience extended across spans of time, rarely granted to vertebrate life. The orca occupies the opposite end of the spectrum. Nothing about its existence is inexpensive. Heat must be generated and retained. Muscles require continual fuel. A large brain consumes energy at a rate that would be unsustainable without reliable access to prey. Yet the orca transforms those costs into advantages. Intelligence becomes a hunting tool. Social bonds become a means of cooperation. Knowledge passes from one generation to the next, accumulating into traditions and techniques refined over decades. Where the shark succeeds by needing less, the orca succeeds by obtaining more. Between those extremes swims the narwhal. Its solution combines elements of endurance and precision. Like other marine mammals, it bears the energetic burden of maintaining warmth in frigid water. Yet it compensates through extraordinary specialization. The sensory structure extending from its face allows it to detect subtle properties of the surrounding sea. Its body is adapted for repeated descents into deep layers inaccessible to many competitors. Rather than mastering the ocean through intelligence or longevity, it succeeds through accuracy, locating opportunities hidden within a complex and shifting environment. The bowhead whale pursued a different route altogether. Scale became its defense. A vast body wrapped in immense layers of blubber resists the relentless extraction of heat by cold water. Energy efficiency reaches remarkable levels through filter feeding. Instead of pursuing large prey, the whale harvests countless small organisms concentrated by the ocean itself. Ice that obstructs other animals becomes something it can break through. Time also favors the bowhead. Lifespans extending beyond 2 centuries allow individuals to persist across changing conditions that would encompass multiple generations of many other species. Then there is the lion's mane jellyfish, perhaps the most radical solution of all. Complexity is discarded wherever possible. There is no brain directing elaborate behavior, no costly musculature supporting long pursuits. The body is composed overwhelmingly of water. Currents provide transportation, tentacles provide capture. Growth occurs rapidly during a single year, transforming a drifting organism into an immense living net suspended within the sea. Energy demands remain extraordinarily low because so many expensive biological systems have been reduced or eliminated. 5 predators, 5 strategies, all shaped by the same environment. None represents a superior design. Each reflects a different pathway through the constraints imposed by cold, darkness, and limited energy. Together they reveal something profound about the Arctic. The ocean does not produce a single ideal predator. It produces multiple possibilities, each viable within its own narrow balance. For countless generations, these solutions have existed side by side, sharing the same waters while responding to the same forces. What binds them is not similarity, but success. Each became a way of enduring conditions that permit little inefficiency. Each is a testament to what long periods of selection can achieve when the environment remains consistent enough for adaptation to take root. The Arctic shaped them all, yet it shaped each one differently, leaving behind a collection of living answers written across the ocean at the same time. Night settles across the Arctic Ocean without ceremony. There is no horizon here, only layers of darkness stacked above darkness. Sea ice resting over water held at 1.8 degrees below zero. Currents moving through channels carved over immense spans of time. Beneath several meters of ice, a Greenland shark advances through the black water at just under 3 kilometers per hour, a pace closer to drifting than pursuit. A faint point of living light marks one eye. The glow comes from a small parasite attached to the cornea, a tiny lantern suspended in a world where almost nothing shines. Around it stretches an emptiness so complete that hundreds of meters pass without a single visible shape. The shark continues forward with the same measured movement it carried yesterday and the day before, and across years that long exceed the span of a human life. Somewhere within its body is chemistry laid down centuries ago. Somewhere within its tissues remains the record of oceans that no longer exist in quite the same form, yet none of that alters its motion. It moves because movement is what it has always done. Then, through the sensory network running along its body, a disturbance arrives. Water ahead has shifted. Something displaced it. The signal is subtle, carried through pressure rather than sound or sight. The shark turns slightly, only a few degrees, and continues onward without haste. In the cold stability below, patience remains the dominant force. Far to the south, beyond the nearest edge of sea ice, open water rises and falls beneath a sky empty of color. A pod of 7 orcas travels northward. Their surfacings occur in rhythm, bodies appearing and disappearing with practiced consistency. Communication is reduced. Echolocation pulses are sparse and controlled. The ocean carries enough information already. At the front swims an older female whose experience extends across decades of migrations, hunts, and remembered routes. Knowledge moves through her pod as surely as blood moves through muscle. Techniques learned long ago persist in living form, transferred from generation to generation without writing, without monuments, without any record except behavior itself. The group advances as a single coordinated unit, each animal adjusting to the movements of the others. Their destination exists not as a point on a map, but as an evolving landscape of opportunity shaped by prey, ice, and season. Much deeper, beyond the upper layers where surface life concentrates, a narwhal rises from a feeding descent. A Greenland halibut rests within its stomach. The surrounding water changes subtly as it approaches the invisible boundary separating different layers of the Arctic Ocean. Through the extraordinary sensory structure extending from its head, it reads gradients hidden from most living things. Salinity shifts, pressure changes. The water itself becomes information. In a few minutes, it will reach a familiar opening in the ice and exchange stored breath for fresh air before turning downward again. Elsewhere, carried eastward by a slow current, a lion's mane jellyfish drifts through darkness. Its immense curtain of tentacles trails behind it across a distance longer than many large animals. There is no intention guiding its path. No strategy unfolds within its body. Contact alone determines outcomes. The current supplies movement. The water supplies prey. The jellyfish simply exists within the flow. 5 predators inhabit the same ocean tonight. The shark below, the orcas to the south, the narwhal ascending from depth, the jellyfish drifting unseen, and the countless seals moving between ice and sea form parts of a single arrangement spread across 14 million square kilometers. The cold is shared by all of them. The darkness belongs to all of them. Generation after generation, the ocean assembled this living architecture, piece by piece, refining it through scarcity, pressure, and time. Tonight, as on countless nights before, the structure remains in motion, each life continuing its small part within a design the Arctic has been building in silence for thousands of years. Long before satellites crossed above the Arctic, before research vessels carried sensors into remote channels, before databases and climate models attempted to describe the changing ocean, the animals living here had already begun recording the same story. In their bodies, every migration, every successful birth, every altered route through ice or open water leaves behind information. The predators of this ocean are not merely inhabitants of an ecosystem. They are measurements made visible, living instruments responding continuously to conditions around them. Their movements, health, and survival form a record written directly into behavior, one that unfolds across the surface and depths of the Arctic every day. An apex predator exists at the far end of countless biological connections. Energy passes upward through algae, copepods, fish, seals, and whales before finally reaching the hunters at the top. Because of this position, even subtle changes echo through them. A shift in ice formation alters feeding opportunities. A change in prey distribution affects migration timing. Variations in temperature influence the structure of entire food webs. The predator becomes a mirror, reflecting conditions that may have begun far below it. When scientists observe where these animals travel, how often they reproduce, or how successfully they feed, they are reading the state of the ecosystem itself. The northward movement of the orca illustrates this relationship with remarkable clarity. Its expanding range is a direct expression of diminishing ice. Waters that once formed an impassable barrier now remain open for longer periods each year. The orca follows those openings. In doing so, it becomes both observer and participant. Its arrival reveals where environmental boundaries have shifted, while its presence creates new pressures that ripple outward through the species already living there. The predator measures change and simultaneously contributes to the next layer of change that follows. Elsewhere, narwhals respond in ways equally revealing. Routes used across generations bend toward denser ice and more isolated regions. Areas that once supported predictable seasonal movements no longer provide the same security. Every detour becomes a line drawn across the ocean, tracing the advancing influence of a new threat. The narwhal does not create maps, yet its movements collectively produce one. The geography of fear described earlier becomes visible through migration itself, transforming behavior into a detailed record of ecological transformation. The Greenland shark tells a different part of the same story. Its extraordinary lifespan allowed it to persist through conditions that changed slowly across centuries. Yet the pressures now affecting the Arctic unfold on timescales far shorter than its own biology. A shark requiring roughly 150 years to reach reproductive maturity cannot easily compensate for increased mortality. The very characteristic that made it one of the most remarkable vertebrates on Earth also limits its ability to respond rapidly when circumstances shift. Its population trajectory becomes a measurement of whether ancient biological strategies can withstand modern rates of change. Bowhead whales contribute another layer. Their migration routes, recorded through satellite tracking, reveal adjustments that carry energetic consequences. Additional distance means additional expenditure. Altered timing affects feeding opportunities. The shape of a migration path becomes evidence, not merely of where a whale travels, but of what the ocean now demands from it. Ringed seals provide perhaps the most direct signal of all. The success or failure of pups born into snow layers converts abstract changes in sea ice into biological reality. Survival rates transform environmental conditions into outcomes measured in living animals. Taken together, these are not separate narratives unfolding in parallel. They are a single account, spoken through many voices at once. The shark, the whale, the seal, the narwhal, and the orca are describing the same ocean from different positions within it. Their testimony is continuous, unfiltered, and deeply precise. In their movements, bodies, and choices, the Arctic is telling its own story, one living creature at a time. Imagine removing abundance from an ocean. Remove the long growing seasons of temperate waters. Remove the endless productivity of tropical reefs. Replace them with months of darkness, water balanced near the freezing point of salt, brief feeding opportunities, and a food web so compact that every connection bears weight. Then, leave those conditions in place, not for centuries, but for spans of time measured in glacial cycles. What remains after that process is the answer that has been surrounding us throughout this journey. Each predator encountered here represents a different solution to the same problem. The Greenland shark solved it through patience, stretched across centuries. The orca solved it through intelligence, cooperation, and cultural memory. The narwhal solved it through sensory specialization so precise that the water itself becomes information. The bowhead solved it through scale, insulation, and extraordinary longevity. The beluga solved it through acoustic sophistication, turning sound into a detailed map of a hidden world. The lion's mane jellyfish solved it by discarding complexity and allowing the ocean's own motion to perform much of the work. At first glance, these solutions appear unrelated. One depends on a giant brain. Another depends on metabolic stillness. One animal actively teaches its young. Another drifts wherever currents happen to carry it. Yet beneath those differences lies a common pattern. None of them wastes energy. None of them survives through approximation. None of them possesses traits that are merely decorative. In an environment where resources arrive unpredictably and winters dominate the calendar, inefficiency accumulates consequences quickly. Over immense spans of evolutionary time, those consequences become selection. The cold itself sits at the center of the process. Cold water carries abundant dissolved oxygen, providing unusual opportunities for biological performance. At the same time, cold slows chemical reactions, alters metabolism, and raises the cost of maintaining warmth. It compresses productivity into narrow seasonal windows and shapes the formation of sea ice, which in turn determines where prey gathers, where predators hunt, and how entire migrations unfold. The ice creates pathways, barriers, refuges, and bottlenecks. The darkness removes reliance on vision and rewards alternative senses. Scarcity narrows the range of viable strategies. Together, these forces act not separately but simultaneously, pressing on every generation that enters the system. Across hundreds of thousands of years, animals that matched these demands reproduced more successfully than those that did not. Small advantages accumulated. Minor inefficiencies disappeared. Behavioral innovations persisted. Anatomical refinements deepened. The process repeated again and again through changing climates, advancing glaciers, retreating ice, and shifting oceans. What swims through Arctic waters today is the cumulative result of those countless rounds of selection. Each species embodies a solution tested repeatedly against one of the most demanding marine environments on Earth. Seen from this perspective, the Arctic Ocean is not merely a location where formidable predators happen to exist. It functions more like a long-running, natural process. Cold, darkness, oxygen, ice, and scarcity operate together as filters, continuously narrowing possibilities. The output of that process is visible in every animal that has endured it successfully. The predators described throughout this story are not accidental products of their surroundings. Their bodies, behaviors, senses, and lifespans carry the imprint of the ocean that shaped them. The Greenland shark, the orca, the narwhal, the bowhead, the beluga, and the lion's mane jellyfish are often described as survivors of the Arctic. That word captures only part of the truth. Survival suggests endurance in the face of conditions imposed from outside. These animals reveal something deeper. They are what the Arctic produced. The cold formed them. Scarcity refined them. Darkness stripped away everything unnecessary. What remains is the most complete answer the ocean has been able to create. For most of this story, the Arctic Ocean has felt ancient, almost fixed in its rhythms. Ice formed, predators moved, migrations unfolded, and generations inherited the same waters their ancestors knew. Yet, no ecosystem remains entirely unchanged. Even the most enduring natural systems respond when the conditions that built them begin to shift. The Arctic now finds itself in such a moment, not because its animals have become less capable, but because the physical machine that shaped them is operating differently than before. Across recent decades, the Arctic has warmed at roughly 2 to 3 times the global average rate. Since satellite monitoring began in the late 1970s, the minimum extent of sea ice has declined by approximately 13% per decade. These numbers describe more than temperature and geography. They describe the gradual removal of structure. Sea ice has never been merely frozen water resting on the ocean's surface. It functions as architecture. It creates barriers, channels movement, protects prey, organizes hunting grounds, and determines the timing of biological events reaching from microscopic algae to the largest predators in the region. As that architecture changes, each species encounters a different version of the same challenge. Deep below the surface, the Greenland shark continues its patient existence on a biological schedule almost impossible to comprehend. A shark requiring roughly 150 years to reach sexual maturity evolved within an environment where change unfolded slowly. Newly accessible waters now permit greater fishing activity across regions that were once difficult to reach. Accidental capture becomes significant when recovery requires centuries rather than decades. The animal's extraordinary longevity, once an advantage shaped by stability, offers little protection against pressures operating on industrial timescales. Farther north, narwhals face a narrowing refuge. For generations, dense pack ice provided protection from predators unable to maneuver effectively within it. Retreat into heavy ice became a reliable response whenever danger approached. Today, that refuge is becoming less extensive, while orcas gain increasing access to Arctic waters. The defense and the threat move in opposite directions at the same time. One contracts as the other expands. The narwhal remains exquisitely adapted to the world that created it, yet that world no longer holds exactly the same shape. Bowhead whales encounter a different transformation. Their migrations unfold across waters where prey distributions increasingly shift with changing ocean conditions. The invisible boundaries separating water masses adjust position. Communities of copepods respond. Feeding opportunities reorganize. At the same time, orcas now appear more regularly within regions that once remained protected by persistent ice. The massive skull evolved to break through thick frozen barriers belongs to an animal entering an era in which those barriers become less common. Among the predators described throughout this journey, the orca appears positioned to benefit most immediately. Expanding open water creates access to prey and territory that remained unavailable for much of recorded history. Yet, even this apparent advantage exists within a larger web of uncertainty. Orca populations remain connected to ecosystems beyond the Arctic, and many of those systems face pressures of their own. Expansion does not eliminate dependence. The lion's mane jellyfish occupies yet another path. With a lifespan measured in a single year and a biology requiring little behavioral adjustment, it can respond rapidly to changing physical conditions. Shifts in water temperature and distribution may alter its range far more quickly than long-lived vertebrates can adapt. What takes centuries for one species may occur across only a handful of generations for another. The Arctic remains what it has always been, a place where powerful forces shape life through persistence. Yet, the forces themselves are changing. The cold, the ice, the timing of seasons, and the structure of habitats no longer align exactly as they once did. The machine that produced these predators still runs, but its settings are no longer the same. What emerges from that altered process belongs to a future that even the oldest inhabitants of this ocean have never experienced before. Stand for a moment not within a human calendar, but within the longer rhythm of the ocean itself. The Arctic that exists today, bounded by familiar coastlines and connected to neighboring seas through narrow passages, is not an eternal arrangement. Geological forces assembled it gradually, continents shifted, ice advanced and retreated, gateways opened and closed. The ocean's modern configuration emerged relatively recently on the scale of Earth's history. Yet once the cold settled into place, it remained with extraordinary persistence, shaping life generation after generation with a consistency few environments can match. The predators that inhabit these waters are products of that continuity, not continuity measured in decades or centuries, but continuity extending far beyond the reach of recorded memory. The Greenland shark, the bowhead whale, the narwhal, and countless less visible creatures inherited conditions remarkably similar to those experienced by their distant ancestors. The darkness remained. The ice returned. The brief productive season arrived and faded. Natural selection worked slowly, almost imperceptibly, refining traits across spans so long that individual lifetimes became insignificant against the backdrop of the process itself. Among all these animals, the Greenland shark provides perhaps the clearest connection to that deeper timescale. Its existence bridges intervals that humans naturally separate into distinct eras. A single shark may have begun life while climatic conditions associated with the later stages of the Little Ice Age still influenced northern waters. It may have continued swimming through periods of exploration, industrialization, technological transformation, and scientific discovery without altering the fundamental pattern of its existence. Throughout those centuries, it remained within the same oceanic darkness, moving through cold water at nearly the same deliberate pace. Human history accelerated around it, while its own world changed with remarkable slowness. The bowhead whale offers a parallel record written in a different medium. When researchers discovered 19th century harpoon fragments embedded within living individuals, they encountered something more than evidence of survival. They found history preserved inside tissue. A decision made by a whaler generations ago remained physically present in an animal still crossing Arctic waters. The metal, transformed by time and absorbed into living flesh, became part of a biological archive spanning both natural and human narratives. The whale carried that record forward, not as a memory, but as matter. These animals are often described as reminders of wilderness, yet even that language feels slightly incomplete. A reminder points towards something absent. The Greenland shark and bowhead whale are not reminders. They are direct continuations. They embody an Arctic that predates nations, written language, organized science, and every institution humanity created to understand the world. Their bodies represent processes that began long before people possessed words for oceans, climates, or evolution itself. They are the living outcome of uninterrupted, cold, operating patiently across immense spans of time. There is a quiet elegance in the form that process ultimately produced. The longest-lived vertebrate known to science is not a creature of dramatic speed or obvious power. It is a slow shark, gray against gray water, moving through darkness with limited vision and minimal urgency. Nothing about it appears extraordinary at first glance. Its significance emerges only when viewed through the lens of time. Every aspect of its biology reflects adaptation refined over intervals difficult to imagine. Longevity, efficiency, patience, and restraint became advantages because the environment rewarded them consistently for longer than civilizations endure. The cold that created such animals feels ancient from a human perspective, even if geology regards it as comparatively recent. For countless generations, it remained reliable enough to shape entire lineages around its presence. The predators, drifting beneath Arctic ice, today are therefore more than successful species. They are living expressions of continuity itself, organisms fashioned by a world that changed slowly enough for evolution to keep pace, carrying within their bodies the patient signature of the oldest cold they have ever known. What survives in the Arctic is rarely what would appear strongest at first glance. Strength, in the ordinary sense, is only one ingredient here, and often not the most important. Across the long history of this ocean, survival has depended on a quieter set of qualities, ones less visible than muscle or speed. The Arctic has never been an environment that rewards excess. It has never offered the abundance that allows mistakes to accumulate unnoticed. Instead, it has always asked a narrower question. Not what can flourish most dramatically, but what can continue when almost everything unnecessary has been stripped away. The distinction matters because thriving suggests a landscape rich with opportunities, a place where organisms can afford experimentation, inefficiency, and waste. The Arctic offers none of those luxuries. For much of the year, life here exists close to energetic limits. Calories arrive briefly and disappear quickly. Warmth must be generated or conserved with extraordinary care. Darkness stretches across seasons. The margin between success and failure becomes so thin that evolution begins refining organisms with unusual precision. Over immense spans of time, small advantages accumulate. Small weaknesses disappear. Seen through that lens, every predator encountered in this ocean becomes a different expression of the same principle. The Greenland shark persists because its body demands remarkably little from the environment around it. The bowhead whale survives because it carries within its enormous frame the tools needed to endure cold and ice that would defeat most other mammals. The narwhal succeeds because it reads subtle information hidden within the water itself, locating opportunities invisible to less specialized animals. The beluga listens with extraordinary sophistication. The orca learns, remembers, and teaches. Even the drifting jellyfish, carried by currents it does not control, survives through a form of efficiency so complete that motion itself becomes optional. None of these solutions emerged because the Arctic was generous. They emerged because it was exacting. Every generation encountered the same relentless arithmetic. Energy gained had to exceed energy spent. Heat lost had to be replaced. Food had to be found despite darkness, distance, and scarcity. Over hundreds of thousands of years, that arithmetic shaped bodies, behaviors, and even genomes. The result is a collection of predators so precisely matched to their environment that they can appear almost inevitable, as though no other form could have occupied these waters. Yet the conditions that produced them unfolded at a pace evolution could follow. Ice advanced gradually, oceans shifted slowly, climatic transitions stretched across spans long enough for populations to adapt generation by generation. The pressures were severe, but they were patient. Natural selection had time to work. The present moment introduces something different. The challenge is not merely environmental change, but the speed of that change. Conditions that once remained stable across many lifetimes are now shifting within the span of a single one. Roots, ice cover, prey distributions, and predator interactions are adjusting on timescales far shorter than those that shaped the organisms responding to them. The traits that once represented perfect solutions are being tested against circumstances they were never specifically built to encounter. Far below the surface, none of this alters the immediate routine of the Greenland shark. It continues through the dark water as it always has. It follows faint gradients. It interprets pressure and chemistry. It moves with the same unhurried patience that carried its kind through centuries beyond counting. The shark possesses no awareness of climate records, satellite measurements, or ecological forecasts. It does not know that the ice above has changed, or that pathways once sealed are opening. It continues forward exactly as the Arctic taught it to do, carrying within its body the lessons of an older world, persisting in the cold, reading the water, and waiting. There is a tendency to imagine harsh environments as places where life retreats, simplifies, and survives only in diminished forms. Yet the Arctic Ocean offers a different lesson. Among all the world's major oceans, it is the smallest. It is the coldest. It spends much of the year in darkness. Its food supply arrives in brief pulses separated by long intervals of scarcity. By almost every measure, it appears to be a place that should limit possibility. And yet, from this demanding environment emerged some of the most extraordinary animals on Earth. Within these waters swims the longest-lived vertebrate ever documented, a shark whose lifespan stretches across centuries. Here, too, lives a predator whose social intelligence, cultural transmission, and cooperative behavior rival the complexity seen in the most cognitively advanced mammals. The deepest diving-toothed whale spends its life descending into darkness beyond the reach of sunlight. A giant whale survives beneath winter ice, protected by insulation thicker than that of any other animal. A drifting jellyfish extends tentacles farther than the length of the largest whale ever measured. Another whale carries in its own tooth a sensory instrument unlike anything else known among marine mammals. Seen together, these animals reveal something larger than individual adaptation. They demonstrate a principle that repeats throughout the history of life. Difficulty does not necessarily suppress complexity. Under the right conditions, difficulty creates it. When resources are abundant and survival margins are wide, many different strategies can coexist. When resources become scarce and margins narrow, every inefficiency becomes visible. Every unnecessary cost is exposed. Every weakness is tested. The Arctic applies that test continuously. It does not pause. It does not provide seasonal abundance sufficient to erase mistakes accumulated through the rest of the year. Generation after generation, the ocean measures bodies against cold, darkness, distance, and scarcity. Over immense spans of evolutionary time, the result is refinement. Adaptations become more precise because imprecise versions disappear. Strategies become more specialized because general ones fail to compete. Complexity emerges not despite the challenge, but because of it. The Greenland shark endures for centuries because patience became more valuable than speed. The narwhal senses subtle changes in the water because locating prey at great depth rewarded individuals capable of extracting information unavailable to others. The orca developed culture because knowledge could be preserved and transferred, allowing one generation to begin where the previous one ended. The bowhead became a master of ice because survival favored those capable of turning barriers into pathways. Even the lion's mane jellyfish represents refinement, reducing biological costs so thoroughly that the surrounding ocean performs much of the work required for survival. In that sense, cold has acted as a teacher for longer than any written history. Scarcity has served as an examination repeated across hundreds of thousands of years. The animals that remain are not merely inhabitants of this ocean. They are the accumulated outcome of every lesson imposed by it. Their bodies contain answers written slowly over timescales almost impossible to imagine, shaped by pressures applied so consistently that evolution could refine them with extraordinary precision. Yet the story now arrives at a threshold, unlike those that shaped the past. For most of their history, the challenges confronting these animals changed gradually. The conditions were severe, but they were stable enough for adaptation to keep pace. Today, the pace itself is different. Ice retreats within decades. Migration routes shift within lifetimes. Ecological relationships reorganize faster than many species reproduce. The ocean remains cold. Darkness still returns each year. Pressure still rules the deep. But the ancient forces that once operated with geological patience are beginning to move more quickly. The same Arctic that spent ages shaping its predators now stands in the midst of a new experiment, one unfolding in real time. What emerges from that process, fashioned from the familiar materials of cold, scarcity, and darkness, remains unwritten, waiting quietly within the water itself. A map can create the illusion of completion. Coastlines are drawn, depths are measured, boundaries are labeled, and the mind begins to assume the unknown has been reduced to manageable proportions. Yet far beneath the Arctic surface, beyond the regions crossed by whales and seals, and beneath the invisible layers that organize the upper ocean, vast areas remain only lightly explored. In many places, knowledge of the Arctic seafloor is astonishingly recent. More of it has been mapped during the last decade than during all previous centuries combined, and each newly resolved contour seems to reveal further complexity rather than closure. The emerging picture suggests an ocean whose deepest predator ecology may be richer and more intricate than anything visible from above. Sonar surveys have uncovered ridges, basins, canyons, and isolated habitats separated by distances that would make migration difficult and adaptation highly local. In such places, isolation becomes an evolutionary force. Populations diverge, behaviors specialize, entire ecological communities can develop under conditions few humans have directly witnessed. During a recent expedition descending thousands of meters into the Arctic deep, researchers encountered organisms never formally recorded by science. The discovery itself was remarkable, yet equally striking was the scale of what remained unseen. The area surveyed represented only a tiny fraction of the total Arctic basin. For every section examined directly, countless others remain known only through indirect measurements and scattered observations. The darkness still exceeds the reach of exploration. Among the inhabitants of that darkness is the giant phantom jellyfish, one of the largest invertebrate predators in the ocean. Despite its immense size, it remains extraordinarily elusive. Across the entire history of marine observation, only a small number of confirmed encounters have been documented. Between those encounters stretches a vast absence of knowledge. Its movements, reproductive cycles, hunting behavior, and population structure remain only partially understood. It drifts through scientific literature, much as it drifts through the deep itself, appearing briefly before disappearing once more into obscurity. Elsewhere on the seafloor, methane and chemical-rich fluids seep upward through ancient sediments. Around these cold seeps, ecosystems emerge that owe nothing to sunlight. Bacteria convert chemical energy into living matter, forming the foundation of food webs that operate according to rules fundamentally different from those governing the surface ocean. As exploration expands, new seep communities continue to appear. Their inhabitants are often known from brief remotely operated vehicle footage, preserved specimens, or fleeting encounters. Entire lives unfold there beyond direct observation. It becomes increasingly difficult to avoid a simple conclusion. There are almost certainly species in the Arctic deep that have not yet been named. There are almost certainly relationships between predators and prey that have never been documented. There are almost certainly behaviors occurring every day in darkness beyond 2,000 meters that no human observer has ever witnessed. Science does not regard these possibilities as fantasy. They arise naturally from the scale of the unexplored territory and the pace at which discoveries continue to emerge. Somewhere within that hidden world, Greenland sharks move through depths reached by few other large vertebrates. Individuals' centuries-old pass between habitats that modern science has only recently learned exist. A shark that has spent hundreds of years traversing the Arctic basin may have encountered communities unknown to taxonomy, crossed ecological boundaries absent from current models, and passed through environments that no camera has ever recorded. The animal carries on regardless, indifferent to whether the places it visits possess names. What makes the Arctic deep so compelling is not merely what has been discovered, but what remains undiscovered. The ocean beneath the halocline is not a finished story awaiting summary. It is an unfinished manuscript, vast sections still unwritten from the perspective of human knowledge. Every expedition adds a few more lines, a few more species, a few more observations. Yet the darkness remains immense, and within that darkness, the Arctic continues to conceal lives, strategies, and predators that may prove stranger, subtler, and more extraordinary than any revealed so far. For an immense span of time, the Arctic Ocean asked the same thing of every creature that entered it. The conditions varied in detail. Seasons advanced and retreated, ice shifted and reformed, but the underlying examination remained remarkably consistent. Cold governed energy, darkness governed perception, scarcity governed opportunity, ice shaped movement, refuge, and survival. Across hundreds of thousands of years, these forces acted together with extraordinary persistence, refining life through repetition. The answers they produced were never ordinary. They were animals defined by patience, precision, efficiency, and endurance beyond anything commonly found elsewhere. Now the ocean finds itself confronting a different challenge. The question is no longer whether a predator can survive cold, darkness, and scarcity. The question is whether the solutions forged by those conditions remain effective when the conditions themselves begin changing. The Arctic is no longer operating with exactly the same inputs that shaped the predators inhabiting it. The cold remains, but its patterns are shifting. The ice remains, but its extent and duration are changing. Boundaries that once held firm are becoming permeable. Ancient ecological relationships are being rearranged. Among the predators that inhabit this world, the Greenland shark may represent the most extreme expression of stability. Nearly every aspect of its biology reflects an investment in persistence rather than flexibility. Growth is slow, reproduction is slow, metabolism is slow, movement is slow. Its strategy has never depended on rapid adjustment. Instead, it relies on the assumption that the surrounding environment changes gradually enough for patience to remain effective. For centuries, that assumption held true. The shark could continue existing much as it always had, its survival tied to constancy rather than innovation. The orca occupies the opposite end of the spectrum. Within its social groups, information moves between generations. Hunting methods can change. New prey can be incorporated into established traditions. Behavioral solutions can spread through a population within years, rather than evolutionary ages. The Arctic now contains an animal whose adaptability functions on a cultural timescale, one vastly faster than genetic change. As conditions shift, the orca alters not only where it travels but how it lives. It carries within its society a mechanism for responding to novelty almost immediately. Between those extremes rests the narwhal, a creature whose remarkable success emerged through specialization. Its relationship with ice, depth, prey distribution, and sensory perception is extraordinarily refined. Yet specialization often comes with a hidden cost. The more precisely an organism fits a particular environment, the more difficult it becomes to function outside that environment. The narwhal embodies one of evolution's enduring trade-offs. Adaptation can create excellence, but excellence sometimes narrows options. The bowhead whale offers another perspective. It has already survived transformations that would have erased many species. Commercial whaling reduced populations dramatically, yet some endured. Generations carried on. Recovery began. Even so, the pressures now accumulating differ from those of the past. Migration routes are shifting. Predator distributions are changing. Food resources are reorganizing as ocean structure changes. The consequences appear not as dramatic, singular events, but as subtle, energetic costs repeated year after year, measured in body condition, reproductive success, and long-term resilience. Viewed together, these animals reveal that the Arctic is not engaged in a debate, it is conducting a test. The participants are among the most refined predators ever produced by cold, scarcity, darkness, and time. Each represents a different solution to the same ancient problem. Some rely on patience. Some rely on intelligence. Some rely on specialization. Some rely on endurance. What makes the present moment unusual is not the existence of pressure. Pressure has always existed here. What is different is the speed at which circumstances are changing. The experiment now underway concerns whether adaptations perfected over immense stretches of evolutionary history remain sufficient when the pace of environmental transformation accelerates beyond anything those adaptations were designed to anticipate. The Arctic Ocean is answering that question continuously. In every migration, every hunt, every birth, and every season that passes across the cold water. Long before any map carried a name for this ocean, before ships crossed it, before measurements, records, or histories existed, the work had already begun. Molecule by molecule, generation by generation, winter after winter, the Arctic was shaping life through a process so gradual it was almost invisible. Nothing happened quickly. Nothing happened by accident. The cold acted with a patience equal to the ages themselves, removing what could not endure and preserving what could. Across immense stretches of time, that simple process accumulated into something extraordinary. The result was not one predator, nor one strategy, but an entire collection of solutions to the same ancient challenge. A shark emerged, whose lifespan extends beyond the rise and fall of nations. A pod of whales developed social traditions capable of carrying knowledge across generations. A narwhal evolved a sensory structure so unusual that it transformed a tooth into an instrument for reading the surrounding sea. A bowhead whale acquired the strength to force passages through ice that appears solid and unbroken. A jellyfish stretched itself into a drifting architecture of astonishing scale. A beluga refined sound into a tool of navigation, communication, and hunting so precise that darkness became almost irrelevant. None of these adaptations appeared because the Arctic was generous. They appeared because it was demanding. Every winter reduced margins. Every season of scarcity tested efficiency. Every kilometer of darkness rewarded organisms capable of extracting more information from less. The ocean offered little comfort, little abundance, and little forgiveness. Yet it was precisely those limitations that drove refinement. What survived was not what was merely adequate. What survived was what matched the environment with extraordinary precision. There is a quiet irony in that reality. By almost every ordinary measure, the Arctic seems an unlikely place to produce greatness. It is comparatively small among the world's oceans. For much of the year, it exists beneath darkness. Food arrives in pulses rather than abundance. Temperatures remain near the edge of what marine life can tolerate. Yet again and again, the most remarkable biological innovations emerge from environments where the costs of failure are highest. Constraint does not stand opposite excellence. Constraint creates the conditions in which excellence becomes necessary. The lesson repeats throughout the lives encountered in these waters. What warmth was unavailable had to be replaced with insulation, efficiency, or patience. What light was absent had to be replaced with sound, sensitivity, or behavior. What food was scarce had to be used with extraordinary care. Over evolutionary time, each challenge became an opportunity for specialization. The cold removed possibilities, but in doing so, it sharpened the few that remained. Even now, beneath ice and water, that history continues moving. Somewhere in the darkness, a Greenland shark advances through its ancient world. It has spent centuries within conditions that shaped every aspect of its existence. It does not recognize its own rarity. It does not know how unusual its lifespan appears from a human perspective. It simply continues, guided by senses tuned to gradients, currents, and faint traces carried through the sea. Its survival is not the result of force or speed. It is the result of alignment. The shark exists because its biology and its environment fit together with remarkable precision. Perhaps that is the deepest truth carried by this ocean. The cold did not merely surround these animals. It built them. It shaped their bodies, their behaviors, their lifespans, and their strategies. It created patience measured in centuries, intelligence expressed through culture, and efficiency refined almost beyond belief. The Arctic became a workshop of extremes, producing creatures that could not afford to be anything less than exactly what they are. And still the cold remains, though not unchanged. For the first time in the long histories, carried within these animals, the force that shaped them is itself beginning to transform. The ocean continues its work as it always has, wave by wave and season by season. Yet beneath that continuity lies a subtle difference. The ancient sculptor is changing. The cold that built this world is warming, and the future of everything it created now drifts quietly within that unfolding change.